In our industry, we don't get paid when we're hired.
Yeah.
We get paid when the result happens.
I think I made $13,000 my first year.
Year two, better.
And then my next year, I think I made 45.
But still not enough to keep you in the industry. And it's generally year three.
Third year was like 65 or 70.
Or year four.
And then I almost tripled it the fourth year.
Wow.
If you're going to make it, that's when you know.
What is it in those first couple years that takes so long to start making a profit?
If you do this like you're thinking, your risk is very high. If you tweak this, and this, you got a much greater chance for success.
You're not going to know that until you kind of go through the motions and get some deals under your belt.
A lot of the advice I'll give to somebody new to the industry is when people don't know who you are, it's hard.
Yeah.
When people do know who you are, everything about the process gets easier. More than anybody I've seen in my career, what you did to create presence for yourself is like, I've never seen anybody do it any better.
I mean, anyone who tries to achieve anything, you're going to have that little voice in your head that kind of tells you, who are you or what are you doing?
I'm 20 years in. I always have to bring up the fact that I'm from this little town. I'd love for that to go away, but I don't know that it ever really goes away. Putting that into action, if you were to jump into the business, I like that we're talking about this, by the way. Thanks for showing up, Rafael, but I'm going to talk to Timmy now. This episode is sponsored in part by the Massimo Group. Are you a commercial real estate broker looking to boost your business? The Massimo Group is the world's premier coaching organization, transforming the careers of brokers just like you, just like it did for me. Visit www.massimo-group.com today to get started and take your career to the next level. This episode is also brought to you by Site to Do Business, commercial real estate's most advanced toolkit, providing commercial real estate professionals like me with premier data, mapping, and marketing tools to win business and revolutionize decision-making. Visit stdb.com to learn more.
Welcome to Commercially Speaking. I'm Timmy Barron, ADHD.
I'm Bo Barron, CCIM.
And this is the Commercial Real Estate Podcast where Bo teaches me everything about commercial real estate investing and commercial real estate, everything pretty much. I started from zero. I knew nothing. Now I know so much thanks to you, all the guests that we have on the show. We've got an exciting guest on the show today that's going to make a very big announcement. Bo, take it away with that.
Not to oversell but we're about to meet my friend Rafael Collazo.
That's it.
But yeah, Rafael, I've known for years. We'll talk about some of this, but he just at the end of December opened his own brokerage firm in Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
It's exciting. Yeah.
Louisville's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's a great city, and I've been there for about 7 years now, so it's been a great city to kind of grow a business in. So,
Where'd you come from? And let's get a little closer to the mic.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was a military brat, kind of like, you were in the military for a while, so you kind of understand the modalities of it. But my dad was in the Air Force, so I was born in Northeast Italy, kind of just off base on Aviano, which is an Air Force base.
Aviano.
Yeah.
Nice.
So moved around a lot growing up.
One of those. Yeah,
there's like I think Louisville was the longest I've ever lived in one place. I think before that it was 5 years.
Yeah.
So I'm just hopping around all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, a vagabond almost.
And now it's 7 years in Louisville and you've opened up your own brokerage.
Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, for everybody else that wants to get to know him a little bit more, I got a little bio here that was shortened. And you know what? AI thought about Rafael's bio for 7 seconds.
Oh yeah,
and this is what we got. This is what we got. So let's see, and then Rafael, you can fill in the gaps. Cool. Rafael is a commercial real estate agent specializing in retail and industrial properties. A former software consultant, he applies his technical background to provide innovative solutions and help investors make the most of each transaction. Prior to co-founding Summit Commercial Group, he facilitated multi-million-dollar deals at the Grisanti Group. Grisanti? Okay. And has lived and worked across the U.S. and abroad, expanding his cultural insights and professional network. Rafael is also the author of the Millennial Playbook series and an experienced speaker who has addressed thousands on personal and professional growth. Oh, this is a good guest we got here. Look who you booked. There we go. He holds a bachelor's in industrial engineering and a minor in economics from Arizona State University. I know personally he runs the podcast Commercial Real Estate 101, correct? Which you've been on when I was doing all the research. That was one of the ones that came up at the top, still comes up at the top. Ladies and gentlemen, Rafael Collazo.
Oh, well,
Pleasure to be here, guys.
Let's be correct.
Okay.
Rafael Collazo,
Mm-hmm.
CCIM.
CCIM.
Yeah.
He is a recent new designee. What, about a year ago?
April 23. Yeah.
Okay, so almost 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
But
That's
that's
crazy
how
how
I
this
met
time
Rafael.
flies.
He was my student in a 102 class in Louisville. He's been on the board of the Kentucky CCIM chapter with me for a couple years now.
Yeah.
And been on the podcast on his. He had another podcast before that one. But this guy, man, he writes books.
Yeah.
He's recently married.
Congratulations.
So he's
And all before
he's a Renaissance man.
all before you turn 28.
No, not quite 20. Almost. I'm 33, about to be 34. So.
Oh my goodness, still very impressive. But take us like a little, couple minute origin story of where you started, when the interest came for commercial real estate, and then what led you to today.
Yeah. So as I said before, I was born in Northeast Italy in a small town called Pordenone. It's about 15 minutes away from Aviano Air Base, 40 minutes north of Venice. I actually just got back from visiting family there a week or two ago, so it was really nice to see them. I hadn't seen them since 2018.
Oh, nice.
But so I started there until I was about 5. Then we moved to Germany, and we were stationed at Baumholder, which was an army base in southern Germany. And then we moved from Germany to Belgium with Senate headquarters, so Supreme headquarters, Allied Powers Europe in shape. And so we were there for 5 years. I was 13 when I left and went to school in southern Arizona. It's a small town called Sierra Vista, which is an hour south of Tucson. And there's a big army base there called Fort Huachuca.
Yeah.
And my dad was there, and I stayed and was in high school there. And then I luckily got a scholarship to go to ASU to study engineering. And after that, I just kind of tried to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Yeah, I had a lot of classmates that were gearheads. I started off in mechanical engineering. I love the math and the science, but I wasn't building engines on the weekends like a lot of my classmates were. So I started getting into this, kind of middle ground where I was like, okay, well, really what I want to do. And I always had an interest in business. Back in sophomore year of college, I started a pasta catering company called Plasticity. And my grandfather, he was a manager for a parts manufacturer back in Italy. But when he retired, he became a farmer.
Yeah,
he'd never put a finger on the ground for his life, and then he ultimately got into that. And he was probably one of the best cooks I've ever met in my life. And I kind of took some of the recipes that he had and came up with a few more myself, and started offering some pasta at chapter events. I was a SIG-EP at Arizona State University. Yeah. So that was kind of how it started. We started cooking a ton of pasta, selling at chapter meetings, and I started getting in with all these different organizations and started selling. And and so I continued along that. I graduated from college, and I thought I was going to go get my master's and try to get an MBA or something like that. But a little bit into that process, I realized, well, let me see if I can make this thing work, because I really wanted to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial. And obviously the restaurant space was available. I connected with a mentor of mine who was a financial advisor in Phoenix, and he took a liking to me. He had a restaurant, let me manage it for 6 months to kind of get a feel for it. It's called That's a Wrap. Yeah. And so I did that for a while and kind of learned the ropes of restaurant, and
I didn't know any of this.
Yeah, this is amazing.
Yeah. So, and I realized it was not what I wanted to do long term, because it's a tough business. I love cooking. I love the act of being able to see people, be satisfied by what you're able to provide. But, there's, how the restaurant business is. It's very time consuming. The people management side has gotten worse over time. And then inventory, right? If there's any fluctuations in input costs, it affects your bottom line. So, and it's even worse today than it was back then. Sure. But, if you have an avocado and 10 different items and the cost of avocado goes up by $1, your margins get obliterated.
Right.
So it's just one of those things where, I saw the future writing on the wall, and I said, I'm going to start looking at other opportunities. And I took a few software classes in college. I never really did a whole lot. I did like MATLAB and Java and stuff like that, but I kind of saw the technology was a space where there's a lot of opportunities. And so I was starting to self-teach SQL and a few other languages, and I just got kind of lucky and applied for a job. And, I got an opportunity to be a software developer and consultant for a company called Fast Enterprises.
Wow.
Out of Colorado. Trained there for 3 months, and then got stationed in I got relocated. I got located to Washington, D.C., and then I was in Puerto Rico for a few years on a big software project. And then after Hurricane Maria hit, I got relocated to Kentucky. And I don't have any connections in Kentucky and no family and nothing. Wow. Just kind of, relocated.
Yeah, wound up here.
So they just dropped you in Louisville.
Yep. There was a project with the city called eMints. So it's essentially the financial software system for the city. So if you file occupational license tax, gift tax, transient tax, it's a big one for for Airbnbs.
Yeah.
We were on that project. So
What led you to leave the software space and go into commercial real estate?
the role itself was pretty transitory. I was moving every other year. And again, I the entrepreneurial itch never goes away. So I was still trying to do stuff kind of somewhat entrepreneurial while I was still at my firm. And that was in the form of writing books. So I started writing a blog called The Strong Professional. And, over time I started compiling all these different stories, or not stories, but really I was researching personal and professional development topics, and I was writing blog posts about them. And after about writing 30 of them, I realized that I had about 35,000 words, and I figured out that a 200-page book is 500 words, or 50,000 words. So I said, well, I'll just write 15,000 words, round it out, and that's essentially my first book. And so started that process, and I was writing about 250 to 500 words a day consistently. And so over time, I started building up a repertoire of different books. I wrote 4 in the Mullet Playbook series, and I've written 3 in commercial real estate.
Wow.
And so, that was kind of my entrepreneurial, flexing while I was at my previous role. And I was doing speeches. I was trying to get into keynote speaking and stuff like that, just to kind of build up a little bit of notoriety, so that if whatever the decision I made in the future, I had some flexibility to travel, or to maybe jump in ship and do that. So I started a real estate meetup in Louisville while I was here, because I had an interest in investing in real estate. So I followed a podcast called Bigger Pockets. And I started learning a little bit about how to underwrite deals and how to identify opportunities. And one of the things they recommended in Bigger Pockets was to start joining a meetup. And there was no real estate meetup in town at the time. And so I just said, well, let me start one. And so I was kind of stalking the forums, and I found someone who also had an interest in potentially starting one, Luke Neubauer, who's a local investor in town. And we just got together one day over a drink and decided to start it, and we kind of ran with it. And at one point we got up to like 100 people that would show up on a monthly basis. And so that was kind of the premise of it. And then they were going to eventually move me to another location, and I'd already started to build some traction on the investing side. I bought a 4-plex, and we moved into one of the units, and I felt a little bit more comfortable taking a leap, because I knew that if, God forbid, something were to happen, and I could sustain myself for a year. So that was kind of the impetus for it. I didn't really know much about commercial real estate. Initially, I looked at residential real estate as an option, but it just didn't fit my personality all that well.
Yeah.
So I took a leap of faith and said, I'm going to try commercial real estate and see what sticks. So,
yeah. And then you did.
Yeah. I got lucky. I think, I'm sure you've talked about it on the podcast. It's a little hard. Well, it's a little hard to break in. I mean, it's very kind of close-guarded industry. I reached out to a lot of the bigger brokerages. I never got a response back. Even some of those smaller regional brokerages, they just said, we just don't really have a place for you here. You don't really have a whole lot of connections in the area. You're not really bringing a lot to the table, and, it is what it is. But, I had the privilege of being able to be part of the Grisanti group. Paul's part Italian, and so there was a connection point there. And I think that was a big reason why he just decided to take a leap of faith, and hopefully it worked out.
Yeah.
Well, my guess is he probably had one conversation with you and thought, yeah, I think this is probably a good move.
Yeah, well, you hope so, but you never know. I mean, I don't have any connections. I didn't have any connections in Louisville at the time, and we know how important relationships are in this business. And so, I was a work in progress for a couple of years, and I'm sure we'll talk about it on the podcast. I mean, I didn't really start making all that much money until maybe 3 years in the business or 4 years in the business. So
let's talk about that. The first couple of years, and especially like for anybody that's interested in going in that needs to prepare, there's no better entry point to hear from than one where you're pretty much starting from zero. Felt like you got lucky, and then you've got no connections, no reason for someone to hire you. Other than when I was laughing when you said got lucky, because everything that you just described was someone who is unstoppable. You're going to create whatever it is you put your mind to. You're going to make it happen some way, some shape or form. So I think luck finds those types of people.
Sure, yeah. I appreciate that. And
absolutely.
I think, and we talk about this a lot where, I think sometimes you get in your own head. I mean, anyone who tries to achieve anything, you're going to have that little voice in your head that kind of tells you, who are you or what are you doing? And so, I'm not immune to that, and I do it all the time, and even to this day.
There's a term for that.
Yeah.
Have you heard the term for what he's describing?
Yeah, imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
yeah.
And like I had a conversation yesterday. I was in the car. I was driving Ben, my son Ben is 18, to church league basketball game.
Yeah. Okay.
They won 80-17.
Wow.
It was his team is like
them.
his team is like the football team, and the team they played looked like freshmen and sophomore, like just really thin guys.
Yeah.
They had no chance. Just the power on, and none of them are good basketball players, like really, like on either side. But you just had, I don't know why I'm talking about this. Anyway,
Well, you're
nice job, Ben.
excited for your son. Yeah.
But I'm having a conversation with Brad Arns. Brad Arns is my partner in Hearthstone Capital.
Okay.
And by the time this episode goes out, we'll probably have.
Yeah.
But Brad's been on the podcast before, and anyway, we're talking about an opportunity that we had, and I have in my brain, and it comes out sometimes in a self-deprecating way, but I have the small town syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you think about doing something big, I always have to bring up the fact that I'm from this little town of 100,000 people. I say that way too much. And it's a version of imposter syndrome. Like, I'm 20 years in. I still deal with that idea. Like, who am I to try to pull something like this off?
Right.
And, I'd love for that to go away. But I don't know that it ever really goes away.
Yeah, I also think it kind of, I don't know, for me, it probably makes me put a lot more pressure on myself to perform. So I do the things that I need to do. So maybe it's a positive in some ways, but it can be a negative in that you put a lot of stress and pressure on yourself to perform. But
well, look, it can go either way, right?
Yeah.
Like if the syndrome is the tip of the mountain and the water flows down one side into motivation, like you're talking about, like that drives you to actually like push through. But I can see that as a positive thing, but the water flows down the other side of the mountain and it holds you back.
It's an inaction versus action.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I get it.
Yeah. So happy to talk about whatever you like about the.
Well, yeah, the first couple of years, like what were you expecting walking into it, and then, if anything, and then how did
Well, I mean, I think again, Paul, my broker's a great individual and really just a stand-up, high-integrity individual, and he sat me down. He sat me down when I first got started, and he said, "You know what? I'll give you a feel for how my first few years went, just to give you some perspective." And he started in the business later in life. I think he was like 48 when he got started. And he had 3 kids, and he had just left his restaurant business. And so he said, "Yeah, my first year, I think I made $15,000. Second year, I think I made 50, and then after that, it was a little bit more established." And this is coming from someone who is, pretty well known in the area. His families have had businesses in the area for a long period of time. And he said, yeah, like there was a lot of stress in the first few years of, being in this profession. So just understand this is likely something that's going to take place, but know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah. And so I think it helped. He prepped me that way. And I knew that if I made $0 my first year, I'd be fine.
Yeah.
And he was also kind enough to be able to offer a draw. What a draw is that they prepay you commissions and you ultimately, pay it back to the brokerage over time. And I think, it was almost nothing. It was like $2,000 a month or something.
Yeah.
But
helpful.
Yeah, it's very helpful. And I had a fourplex that I was living in, so I had no more. The rents were covering the mortgage payment. Yeah. My wife now, but my girlfriend at the time was working. So, I definitely was in a unique situation in that regard that I didn't need to make money immediately. Yeah. Which helps because if you get into a position when you're dealing with potential clients and you feel desperate, it makes it, people just kind of get turned off by that.
Right. Yeah. We've talked about that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, my first year, I think, just to summarize, I think I made $13,000 my first year.
Wow. And
then my next year, I think I made 45 or something. And then third year was like 65 or 70. And then I almost tripled it the fourth year.
Wow.
Yeah. And then after this last year, I did better than the year before. So it's just slowly starting to build,
I've heard that story over and over and over again. Year 1, next to nothing. Year 2, better, but still not enough to keep you in the industry. And it's generally year 3 or year 4 where things hit. If you're going to make it, like that's when you know. And it was the same way for me. Year 1 and year 2 were middle. I was just figuring it out, Right. And then it was year 3 when it took off. When there's kind of an inflection point there.
Yeah. What is it you're figuring? Like so we've been doing this podcast, right, for a year and a half, almost 2 years, and I've learned a lot of information about how to do this, the ins and outs of commercial real estate to a degree, right? So if I were to jump into brokerage right now, would I be expected, would there be like a couple of years where, got to put it to action? Or, what is it in those first couple of years that takes so long to start making a profit?
Well, I'd say one is most of the time when you start in anything, you don't know much and you're not that valuable to the people you serve.
Right.
So, a lot of the advice I'll give to somebody new to the industry is try to find a firm where you can team up with somebody that's doing a lot of deals. Because what you need more than anything is reps. Like you just need reps so you can learn how stuff goes. Like, I don't know how long it was before I felt comfortable understanding, like, what is even the process of leading up to closing?
Right.
Like, I found somebody a property. They want it. We put it under contract. But then I would be like, what the heck now? What am I supposed to be doing now to get this over the finish line? And I would just hope the attorneys would take care of it and it would close.
Right.
And it was a while before I just understood how that process worked. Just getting the reps.
Yeah.
So that you start to have confidence that I can really help this person.
Right.
That changes the dynamic of the relationship in a big way, just the confidence.
Right.
So you've got a lot of information now. You've learned a lot through the podcast, but putting that into action, if you were to jump into the business, like that we're talking about this, by the way.
Don't get your hopes up.
This is a segue to.
I know. And thanks for showing up, Rafael. But I'm going to talk to Timmy now. Thanks for driving over to Owensboro. No, but the other thing is, like, where do you get the deal flow? How do you source your deals? Because in our industry, once you get hired, that's just the start of the process. Like, we don't get paid when we're hired.
Yeah.
We get paid when the result happens.
Right.
Like when there's a closing or a lease executed or something like that.
Right.
So one, you got to, if you're with a firm that will give you spooners, like feed you opportunities, that's one way to source deals, right? But if you're totally relying on that and the market goes into a downturn and the phone stops ringing, well, the spooners go away. So now you're completely dependent upon how the market's doing.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want that. So now you got to start prospecting. You got to start calling. You got to create a presence for yourself so that people know who you are. Because look, you can do all the prospecting you want. You're going to have some success. And I bet you did this.
Starting out for sure.
But man, when people don't know who you are, it's hard.
Yeah.
When people do know who you are, everything about the process gets easier.
Right.
So when you want to start, trying to source those deals, like pursue the deals that you want. And at the same time, you're trying to, create presence for yourself so that people know who you are.
Right.
And that's the thing that I just want to point out, which was so smart about what you were doing. I don't know if you just, based on your personality or drive or whatever, you just naturally do this, but there's a phrase that I like from this podcast I listen to called The Jordan Harbinger Show. Have you ever listened to that?
I don't think I have, no.
You should check that out. He interviews really interesting people and basically pulls out wisdom from them.
Yeah.
From like spies to CEOs to, authors and generals. And he gets big names on there and just interesting people. Anyway, his phrase is dig the well before you're thirsty.
Yeah.
And as you were talking about the things you that kind of led to, and you were digging the well the whole time. And who writes books about commercial real estate in their first couple years in the industry? Like, I've never heard of that. Like the podcasting from the jump, the meetup before you even started. Like there's 100 people on a monthly basis that knew who you were. Like more than anybody I've seen in my career, like what you did to create presence for yourself is like, I've never seen anybody do it any better.
No, I appreciate it.
And it's definitely benefiting you now.
Oh, yeah.
Like people know who you are. It was brilliantly done.
And I'm sure you guys are getting business from outside of the state, too. Or I've gotten calls from many people who have listened to the podcast, and they're like, I'm working with 2 assignments right now that are, a firm out of New Mexico. They have 2 10-rep assignments in Louisville, and one of the people listening to the podcast put me in touch with the CEO, and then we've been in touch, and I'm working with 2 assignments right now. I've worked with other people from across the state or across the country, really, that are looking in this little area, and they call and ask questions. Sometimes they'll engage me, sometimes they won't, but you start having some of those conversations, and you realize commercial real estate doesn't really have borders. There's a lot of opportunities to collaborate on deals outside of the market. So
right.
But yeah, and I'd say another thing too when you first get started is you just don't know how to vet people too. I feel like I wasted a lot of time with people who literally had no business either leasing property or they were trying to buy something. I remember one time I was working with this lady, really nice lady, but I didn't know all the questions to ask her, and I'd been working with her for like a year and a half. We finally put a property under contract. We're going through the process of acquiring it. And then, 30 or 40 days into the process, she says, oh, yeah, by the way, my husband filed for bankruptcy 6 years ago. I'm like, oh. I know. So it's like you've been working with someone for a year and a half. You finally feel like you're going to, make this happen. And then all of a sudden it falls apart because the bank's like, no. I mean, unfortunately, with bankruptcy, your credit's pretty much shot until, I think, 7 years is the drop-off. Maybe more, maybe 10.
I think that might be right. I'm not really sure.
But essentially they said, no, we're not going to loan you the money, and it ultimately fell apart. So,
Right.
And that was early in the process where that was maybe like one of 4 deals I was working on. So
Yeah.
I was like, man, this really sucks because it would have been a decent commission. I think the smaller commission, the early commissions I was working on were small lease deals and stuff like that. So it really didn't make a dent in anything. And even with lease deals, you think they're going to close quick, and it takes forever, forever. And even get paid on them sometimes takes longer.
Paid on leases takes a while sometimes. Yeah.
So what you learned from that is check their credit first. One of the first things you do.
You don't have to check credit, but you have to ask questions. You have to continually try to get an understanding of what position they're in, and oftentimes it's not me asking the questions. I just put them in touch with the people that can ask those questions.
Yeah,
and it's valid. Whether a bank, maybe you incorporate them early in the process with a bank. Say, hey, we need to get in touch with a bank before we start this process because there's going to be some things we have to do, and we're going to need information from them in order to move this forward. For leasing, I always ask for either a personal financial statement or bank statements or whatever, because especially if you're a startup, owners are taking risks on you because they're going to if they let you in the space and you reconfigure the space and all of a sudden you go dark, maybe now they have a space that's unusable for their next tenant, and so it creates this whole dynamic. And obviously the more downtime the space has, the owners aren't making money, and so oftentimes they prefer to go with known commodities than startups. And so if you're going to be working with startups, which is typically where you start a lot of times in the industry, is that you got to really make sure that you set them up for success so that the probability of them getting into space is higher.
Yeah.
So,
one of the things we do here is there's and this is a contact through top producer Todd Humphreys.
Top producer Todd Humphreys.
But he's got a buddy who's he's essentially a business coach and great with the numbers. And so a lot of times when we'll have a startup, we'll connect them to this guy. And he'll run them through, make sure they've got a solid business plan, make sure that they've got the wherewithal to pull this off. Sometimes he'll encourage them to say, look, if you do this like you're thinking, your risk is very high. But if you tweak this, and this, you got a much greater chance for success. We did a deal downtown with a musician who's local, but he's had some success in Nashville, and he did a bar downtown, and he was looking to do something bigger. He met with Ron, and Ron took him through the business plan, and he's like, look, you need to start with something much smaller. And you can almost guarantee your success if you'll do this. And if you try to go big, like everything has to go right. And there's a great chance that's not going to happen. And you're going to find yourself out of business. And so that's what we did. We put him in something. It's had great success. Now, I think they're considering maybe adding a location or doing something different, but they've got something now they can replicate that's really worked. But it's it's a version of qualifying your prospect. Like, is it worth my time? Is there a real chance that a deal can happen here? And if we don't do that, it can all fall apart, but you're not helping anybody. No. In fact, you're actually hurting the person you're trying to serve.
Yeah, and it goes on the owner side too, because I'm sure you've talked to many owners, I know I have, that are unrealistic about what their expectations are, whether that's for a sale or a lease or whatever. And so, oftentimes early on in my career, I would work with an owner that would be unrealistic about a sales price, for example, and it would sit on the market. And not only does it, affect, them because they're upset that it's not trading, but it's also potentially reputationally affecting you as well, because if you could become known as someone who just lists whatever and, it's way out of line with what the market is, people just in the marketplace know. And it's like, oh, well, they listed another property that is kind of out of whack. And whether or not it is, it could very well be right in line with what the market is. But the initial thought that people have is like, oh, well, that's not really in the ballpark.
Boy who cried listing.
Yeah, exactly. So it creates
I like what you did there.
Yeah.
It's a lot like that.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of people in the beginning of their careers, they're thinking, well, these senior agents are telling me, look, you really need to qualify your people because you don't want to waste the time. And you're sitting here thinking, I got all the time in the world. Like, I'm not busy yet. I don't have 15 deals I'm working on right now. Like, I've got the time. But you can really hurt your reputation, And I was talking to a guy yesterday in Columbus, Ohio, and they're really good at finding off-market multifamily deals to buy. And that's what they do. They buy multifamily, 1,500 units, I think, at this point. They're trying to 10x it over the next 10 years. But what they're really good is, and this is how he put it, we find the people who need to sell, not who want to sell.
Yeah.
And if you actually work with somebody that needs to sell, well, there's probably going to be a sale.
Yeah.
And if you work with somebody who wants to sell, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
But if they don't get their number, they're not, and if the number's not realistic, you could totally be wasting your time, which is a lot of the reason why we don't mind being second or third
on the batting order once the other listings don't work out. Yeah. I've been in that position.
Like, let the residential firm that can get some commercial deals take that unrealistic price to the market. Waste 6 months to a year. We'll come in later on when people have gotten more realistic.
Sure.
And we can actually help somebody.
Absolutely.
So
it makes the experience better for everyone because the expectations are properly set from the beginning, so they understand when things start to happen and it starts to happen the way you said it was going to happen. That's where trust is built. Because if you say, oh, yeah, we could sell this in 3 months, and your price is unrealistic, and 3 months comes around and it's not sold, now you've built this kind of barrier between your client because it's like, oh, you told me one thing when in reality something didn't happen that way. And that's all through experience. You're not going to know that until you kind of go through the motions and get some deals under your belt.
Right. Are you familiar with Beth Azor?
Yeah. No, she's great. And we had her on the podcast.
Yeah. She's incredible. But like after interviewing her and, editing that and watching that, I'm like, oh, go canvas, right? Like canvassing.
I love canvassing. It's great.
Yeah. It's like, that's what made me think, I wonder if I were to get into brokerage, I'm armed with what she just talked about with canvassing. And I feel like I would be good at that,
I feel like you would be too. That'd be what we call a fast start to a long career.
Fast start to a long career?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you seem like someone who would be great physically in front of people. And I feel the same way. So personally, I prefer to physically go into businesses and introduce myself and let people know. And especially if you have something to provide them, whether that's like a report for the market.
Right.
You stop in and say, hey, introduce yourself and say, hey, here's an update on some of the lease rates that are happening in the area. If you guys are interested in opening a second location, just give me a call. Or maybe you have a listing, like a lease listing, and you just walk in and say, hey, look, there's a building just out around the corner over here that maybe you guys are interested in. Maybe you need more space. You can move over there. So it creates these moments where you can build those relationships.
Right. You're the one that they're seeing. Yeah. Right. You're the one that they're seeing, and oh wow, they came in.
Yeah, and you're likable, so it helps.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I feel like you'd have to dress up a little bit to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't dress. I wouldn't dress with a 3-piece suit. But
sure.
Yeah. It depends. It really depends on your clientele too, because this where if you show up in a 3-piece suit to an industrial building, people are gonna be like, "What are you doing?"
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
It's important to consider who you're going to be talking to. I remember one time I went and talked to a farmer's widow about some of her land. I'd been talking with some of her kids, and we were trying to put a parcel together for a big retail development. And so I went to go meet with her for the first time. I was dressed in a suit, tie. I think I was still wearing ties back then. And she lived in a metal building, like a big on a farm metal building, and there was a trailer inside the metal building.
Wow.
Yeah.
So think of a single wide inside of a big metal building, pole barn type thing. And when I walked in there, the only thing she did for the last 20 years in that trailer was smoke.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember leaving. I'm in a suit and tie. I smelled completely like an ashtray.
Yeah.
Went straight home. Autumn's looking at me like, what on earth were you just doing?
Yeah. I didn't know you were going bowling.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of smelled like an old bowling alley.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I need to be more cognizant of considering who I'm going to be meeting with.
Right.
And
Dad was always good at that, like changing his tone, knowing how to talk to people.
so good. Yeah, his emotional IQ's off the charts.
Right. Like going into sporting goods stores, I throw this hoodie on, go talk to the sporting good owner.
Here's the other thing about that, though.
Yeah.
Being cognizant of who you're going to meet with, but also being, don't really fake it.
Well, of course, yeah, no.
So, like putting you in a 3-piece suit is probably a bad idea, period.
Right.
There's I forget what market it is. There's this broker, ponytail, like he has his own unique look.
Yeah.
And he does not conform to the norms of the industry.
Right.
He's incredibly authentic. You know what you're getting with him. He's very, very effective, has a great reputation, but he does not look like a broker.
Right.
So you can pull that off.
Yeah.
You can pull that off.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sitting here in a sport coat.
Well, you look good though.
Well, thanks. Yeah. I did want to ask you, we had a conversation, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago, and we were talking about kind of this idea of executive office space, and we were looking at buying a building and doing kind of what we've done here, where we lease out furnished offices month to month. And you mentioned you had a fourplex before you even got in the industry.
Yeah.
But what kind of investing have you done now that you're in the industry?
As a commercial real estate broker, your success depends on the right strategies and guidance. The Massimo Group, the world's top coaching organization for brokers, can help you scale your business and increase your income. And as a former client, I've personally experienced how their coaching can transform not only your career, but also your life. Don't wait to grow. Head to www.massimo-group.com today and see how their proven systems can work for you. This episode is also brought to you by Site to Do Business, the ultimate commercial real estate data analysis and mapping tool. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, Site to Do Business provides the data and insights you need to make informed decisions and close deals faster. Frankly, it's the tool that I use the most in my business. Access comprehensive market analysis, demographic data, and powerful mapping tools like ArcGIS, Placer AI, and Flood Maps all in one place. Identify the best locations for your clients, analyze market trends, and present your findings with confidence. Don't miss out on this game-changing platform. Visit stdb.com today and see how it can optimize your business. And now back to the show.
Really, the first few years I did none. I just really was trying to get through the first few years, and then after that, my fourth year, I just reinvested everything I could into my business and try to kind of solidify myself and in financially, because when the first early years, I got to admit there was times where I had to use debt to kind of cover my living expenses, especially 2-3 years in the business. And so I had to pay off some of that debt and kind of get back on track. And so, candidly, I didn't invest almost at all until really this last year. And then we bought a building over off of, a surging type of market within Louisville. There's a lot of rezoning happening in the area. So me and my business partner, Barrick Goff, we ended up buying a building, rezoning it. And, now we're going to eventually do some form of development on site and for the neighboring property as well. And then I also bought another building that was the same type of situation with another business partner, where we put it under contract, rezoned it, and then we found tenants for it. So I found the tenants by canvassing.
Yeah.
So I just literally plotted a map, and I said, okay, well, I think these types of uses could potentially be good. I'm just going to create I think I used ChapGPT to give me the most effective route.
Yeah.
And I just did it. And I probably talked to 100 different.
I have never... Like you asked ChapGPT to take these addresses and
starting point, and then based on that, make it the most efficient route you can.
There's a new use case. Use case for that. Yeah.
We were talking with our buddy Michael Hieronymus the other day, last Friday.
Yeah.
And he said what he'll do, and I've never heard this one either, and you'll like this, I think. He takes the ingredients that he has in his kitchen and throws them into ChapGPT and asks it to give him a recipe that he can make based on what he has in the kitchen.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
And he's like, man, we've come up with some really tasty dishes doing that.
You would love that.
I love it. Yeah. And I haven't played around with it, but I think you can upload pictures and videos and it'll recognize it right now. Or is that not true?
I'm probably not the guy to ask.
Yeah. Well, you'll ask at some point.
In just a little bit. We're going live with him. Yeah. There are some things where they can do that for sure. Yeah.
But, well, getting back to investing, talk to me a little bit about the difference in mindset in brokering a deal versus investing in a deal.
I think the big thing is just understanding that you're the one taking the risk, because oftentimes when you're recommending clients to do certain things, it's easy to say, oh yeah, you should do that because you think it's going to be a long-term investment. But when your skin's in the game and things can go wrong, I mean, nothing's perfect. I think it creates another layer of just like, oh my gosh, it creates a little bit of the unknown that you have to kind of deal with. And, the stuff that we bought was a little bit complicated because we had to put the property under contract, get enough time within that contract to be able to rezone. And in Louisville, rezoning is a pain in the butt. It takes anywhere between 8 to 12 months, depending on if the zoning's contentious and whatever else. And so you have to involve a site engineer, you have to involve an architect sometimes, which is additional fees. We had raised a little bit of money to do it, so we had to create these disclaimer docs with attorneys to be able to collect the money and make sure we're covering our bases on that front. So all these moving pieces, and I think you realize there's a lot of soft costs involved with buying property. And so I didn't expect to have to spend as much as we did just to control the property, not even to buy it. I mean, if this thing would have not worked out, we would have been out like $40,000. So that's a lot of money to have to be out and not have anything to show for it, and that happens a lot in development.
Yeah.
So
can you walk me through like that story of finding the property you wanted to buy and then talking to your business partner and like the story of it?
Well, he actually was the one who identified it, and I knew of this area. It's called Shelby Park. I knew of it, but I wasn't really active in it. It wasn't an area that just I had my area, but he had some properties somewhat nearby, and he had seen this corridor evolve over time because he's native to Louisville. Yeah. And before that little corridor was pretty bad. It was not a good area. And then over the course of the last 10 years, it's really changed. And I think now it's on the verge of becoming a really vibrant and prosperous area. Yeah. And so he kind of brought the building. He said, look, like this thing's a little bit overpriced, but if we can get the rezone on this thing, maybe it's going to be worth a good amount more. And so I did all the research and kind of did the comps and tried to get a feel for what the average lease rates are for the area. I said, I think you're right. And so we put it under contract, let the owner know that it's going to be contingent upon a rezone because they wanted their price. And we're like, okay, well, if you want your price, we want our terms. Sure. So we kind of worked with them on that. And, over that period of time, we had to, file an application for rezone with the city. Then we had to, have a neighborhood meeting, which means we got to notify all the people that are close to the property to notify them of what's taking place and what a proposal is for the property.
Did you understand going into that what it would entail to get the rezone to happen? No. So this was all brand new to you. So every little thing was like
I had been involved adjacent to rezones with my clients, but I wasn't physically involved in the process because the attorneys handle it, right? The land use attorneys are the ones who typically run in the neighborhood meetings. They're the ones who are going to the Metro Council and land planning commission to kind of present the case. So for me, I just knew, okay, is the land use attorney in place as far as, for my client? Great, they're going to handle it. And I knew a lot of the land use attorneys in town, so I know which ones are good. So if they're with a good one, I'm like, oh, it's going to get taken care of. I don't have to really worry about it as much as, in this case where it was, my neck on the line. Right. And I didn't, for this particular case, it was a really uncontentious rezone because literally all the properties in that area are starting to change over to commercial. So we didn't really have any opposition. So we didn't engage with the land use attorney. Okay. So I handled a lot of that process. My business partner and I handled a lot of that process on our own.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, I mean, it was just more so than anything, it's just the time it takes to get these things moving forward. Yeah. And then knowing that, you got to get a site engineer in play, you got to get an architect in play. And luckily the city has some pretty good people that have been around for a while, so they kind of educate you on it as well. Yeah, okay. So it saved us a little bit of time in that regard. But we still had to engage our own site planning attorney. Luckily, because I'm commercial real estate, my broker had worked with this site engineer for a long time, recommended it to me. We sat down with him, started getting quotes, and ultimately decided to go with one. And then the architect, same thing. They were just down the street. And so we had to provide the city with elevations, which showcases that what the new development's going to be. Yeah. So we had to retain the services of their services and kind of go through that process as well. So it was a big learning experience. Yeah. But now I know. Right. Yeah.
Now you know. How much did you say you were spending the soft cost?
About $40,000.
About $40,000.
Once it's all said and done, between my business partner and I, so we kicked up about $20,000.
Yeah, $40,000. That's just the cost of that. And then you've got the cost of buying the building.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the building. It's all right. Yeah. When he's smiling, Noah's smiling because he knows it's expensive. It's very expensive to go through that process.
Did you get a phase one? Did you do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we did this phase one, and we we got a clear on site. So
I'm more convinced the further I get in my career that there's no reason, none, not one. Let me say it the other way. That 100% of the time you should get a phase one, period.
You should. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what is that? What is phase one?
Phase one is an environmental study where an environmental engineer will go to the site and we'll look around and we'll see if they see anything that stresses them out. Is there clear evidence of contamination in clear sight? They'll also research the uses that happened on that property and adjacent properties.
Yeah, okay.
And what they're trying to do is, by plain sight inspection and some research, is there any reason we should be concerned that there's environmental contamination on this site?
Gotcha.
All right. Get a report. If all that checks out, they say, look, phase one's good, then that's generally all you need.
Yeah.
Okay? If they do some research and they see that there was a service station where there used to be a dry cleaner, or some of these like huge red flags, there was an underground tank over there and nobody really knows what happened to it or what was in it, then the phase one might call for a phase two. Now, phase ones you can probably get done sometimes for $2,500 or $5,000. Not that expensive. It's not nothing, but it's not that expensive.
Yeah.
Generally takes, a matter of weeks, maybe a month. If the phase one comes back and says, look, there is cause for concern, we recommend a phase two. Then a phase two study is they come in and they take boring samples. Like they bore down, they take soil and water samples, and they analyze to see if there's contamination. Well, that takes longer. It costs a lot more. And, man, I heard this story in New Orleans. Somebody bought a KFC. Triple net deal, KFC. Tenant. KFC was already there, blah, blah. And then it came out that because of a dry cleaner or something like that, that land was contaminated. I think it was a dry cleaner. The chemicals they use are really bad.
Oh, okay.
More so back in the day. I think the industry is, like landlords are scared to death of dry cleaners just because of what we're talking about. But I don't think they use the same kind of chemicals that they used to. Gotcha. However, if that stuff gets in the ground, it never goes away.
Oof.
It's not like you wait 10 years or you can remediate or whatever. It's like it's a death nail to that. And that's what happened. This KFC shut down, and it still just sits there as an empty building.
Wow.
Because of that contamination.
Oof.
And somebody bought that as a triple net deal with a
20-year lease or something like that.
Yikes.
Yeah, when you said a dry cleaner would be a red flag, I was like, is it because of the risk of a Breaking Bad situation?
Well, and there's differences between the pickup stations. So there's usually smaller spaces where you drop off your dry cleaning and then they take it to what's known as a plant, and that's where they actually process and do everything.
Yeah,
that whole process. And so I've faced that in the past where we were looking at this big shopping center in Louisville, and we went through a phase one, and there was a concern because there was a dry cleaner on site, but we were able to confirm that it was only a pickup station. It was never a plant, because the bank was like, we're not funding this thing if we can't figure this out. And we're just like, okay. So we're trying to scramble to try to find this guy. And I was able to use my network to find the original owner of this location.
Wow.
And he was still living, and he owned other dry cleaners, but he wasn't at that location anymore. And so we had to kind of ask him, like, hey, whatever happened over there? And he's like, well, it was always a pickup spot. So we're able to confirm that in writing via email, and we got it figured out. But
yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah. Okay. So phase one, because I'm thinking through this. You do the phase one, right? How often would you go spend the money and the time for a phase two? Is it like if that deal is looking really, really good? Or oftentimes it's like if you got to go into a phase two, you're moving on?
No, I would say neither. I've never heard of anybody doing a phase two if the phase one didn't call for it.
And that's what I'm talking about. In that situation, the phase one called for a phase two.
Yeah.
Are you leaving it or?
Yeah, if the phase one comes back clean to me, then I'm feeling good and I'm going to move forward.
Sure.
Yeah. But I wouldn't just say, man, this deal looks really good. I want to make sure I'm not about to step in it.
No, what I'm saying is phase one has called for a phase two. So are you spending the money and time to do that phase two? Or since phase one called for phase two, you're like, let's move on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd be interested in your answering this, but I would generally
you might be talking about 15 grand. I'm just guessing on a phase 2. So it's some more money, but if that makes your deal look bad, that extra expense, the deal wasn't good enough to do in the first place.
Sure.
So if you really like the deal, like I would go and do the phase 2.
Right.
There's different types of contaminants. So PERC is one of the worst, which is the dry cleaners. But there's also in-ground lifts. So for a lot of auto shops, not all, but some have the above-ground lifts that don't actually bore into the ground, and then there's others that are in-ground that go deeper into the ground. And so the contaminants there could be oil, it could be other factors, but PERC, the reason it's so bad is because it's lighter than, I think, water, so it sinks further down into the ground. It could potentially get in the watershed and cause a lot of contamination. But with the oil, for example, that's usually, there's different levels of potential contamination. So in that case, sometimes it's a little bit less of a concern. Not to say it's not.
Sure.
And also, there's other programs that you could look into. I know that Kentucky has a brownfields program. So if you run a phase 1 prior to closing and you identify a potential contamination, you could place the property in what's known as the brownfields program, which essentially means that you are going to monitor the potential, the future contamination on site. You create this what's known as a property management plan for the site, and sometimes you have to put in wells to kind of test things, but it helps the banks get on board because it helps alleviate any future liability to the buyer as long as they don't do anything that would cause future contamination. So if you were a dry cleaner and you wanted to buy this building that was a dry cleaner and you want to put it in the phase 1, if you're going to operate your dry cleaner on site, they would not allow you in the program because you're going to essentially continue the contamination as it stood. But if you were going to do, I don't know, a food spot or whatever that is, it creates that opportunity.
Well, just say you're going to turn a Jiffy Lube into a Taco Bell.
Yep.
Well, if there's contamination there, you execute the plan. You can put it in that brownfield program. You execute the plan. There might be some remediation. But now as the buyer, I know as long as I execute the plan and I don't recontaminate it, I don't have liability for what was caused before me.
Yeah, okay.
And that is generally what will free up the banks to lend and you to sleep at night. And if the deal's good enough, you do it.
Yeah, right, right, yeah. And Taco Bell, I mean, you're going to expect a little bit of contamination anyway, right? I'm kidding. Taco Bell, sponsor the podcast.
That's gonna.
I love Taco Bell.
Go your cheesy gordita crunch, right?
Yeah, those are good.
I miss Taco Bell. I miss double-decker tacos.
Oh,
Would you bring those back for me? Like, actually, don't bring those back for me.
I miss the volcano tacos. I miss those.
I don't, not familiar with that.
Anyway, let's move on.
Okay.
Let's move on from Taco Bell. Because I am interested and curious because, can you break down a little bit of where that $40,000 went to? For anybody that's interested in doing this, what to...
Yeah, so I'd say we had about a 3,000 to 4,000 in phase 1. We had site engineer was about $5,000 or $6,000. We had architect was I think 13,000. We had legal, which was probably closer to 15,000 to 20,000. And then other miscellaneous stuff throughout the process. So that's kind of how it broke down. And granted, we did raise some money to do the deal, so if we didn't have to deal with legal, maybe it saves you a little bit more money. We didn't retain an attorney for land use. Okay. Those land use attorneys are probably in that $8,000 to $10,000 range, so we're able to save a little bit on that.
Yeah.
But
so your attorney fees were essentially syndication attorneys, like securities attorneys?
Yeah, the security. And we didn't even do what's known as a private placement memorandum because we didn't. I guess we kind of looked at the deal and the amount of money we were raising and the amount of people that were involved, and it didn't necessarily need to qualify for that.
I got you.
Because if you have to do that, you're talking. I mean, it's like $50,000 to do all the things you need to do to make sure you're compliant. You have to register with the SEC and all this other stuff, which we didn't necessarily have to do. We created what's known as like a disclaimer document. It's like a beefed up document that says all the things that could go wrong, like all the catastrophes that could happen.
Sure.
So
yeah. All right.
But we got advice from our attorneys about that, so we weren't gonna.
Yeah, you're not just
yeah.
Like not every deal would need an architect, or would it?
Well, so it depends. If you modify the exterior and you're asking for a rezone in Jefferson County, I don't know how it is in other places. You have to provide elevations. Elevations meaning what is it going to look like? Because I mean, if you let's say that you're in an old part of town, right? And all the buildings are, they're from the early 1900s or 1800s or wherever else, and you propose a brand new build that's going to have all this glass and metal all over the place, I would imagine that the city's going to be like, no,
right,
we don't want you to damage the integrity or the how things look,
the uniformity
of the area.
Right.
So elevation, if you've never heard that term before, it's basically a drawing of what it's going to look like.
Oh, okay.
And from kind of each angle. And so they do their architecture thing, create an elevation. It's really just a picture. This is what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
That's what an elevation is.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into it. Yeah. The designing and creating of it. I know.
Right. So they know what to draw. But
right.
Draw might not be the right word. It's probably all automated. Or when you see your elevations.
And they'd use Maya, right? Architects, you'd use Maya, the 3D animation software. Anyway,
maybe they probably do.
Yeah,
but that's you're showing an image of what it's going to look like.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah,
gotcha.
And another thing too, which I'm sure we could talk about this for a whole episode, is knowing what you need and what you don't need through this process. We learned a lot. I mean, you know how it is with different service providers. They sometimes overdo what they need to do, and so the clock's running the whole time. So we were obviously unaware of some of these things that were taking place in the background, and we just thought, okay, well, this is the what we've got as a quote, and this is what we can expect as far as the budget's concerned. But if anything comes up throughout that process and it requires more involvement from the service providers, well, that changes your cost structure as well. And so a lot of that is it's a lot of negotiation. We talked about it earlier in this podcast. I mean, you can't assume that everyone's just going to treat your money like the way you would want it to be treated, right? So because to them, and that kind of leads it back to the broker, is like when your money's not at stake, it's a lot easier to say, oh yeah, well, let's do this, when in reality it's different, when you actually have your money at stake. So,
right. And in the deal, did you structure it as a syndication? Like GP?
No, we did not. So that's another reason that we didn't need to do the whole securities, model and everything like that. So it was more of a kind of a JV. That's kind of how we structured it. So we were the primary owners because my business partner Barron and I put up most of the money, and then we kind of rounded it. I think we raised like $125,000.
Okay.
The rest was all of our money. So.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's most of the structures are investing that we've talked about or hear about are syndications, right?
That is
right.
Almost exclusively what we talked about, like versions of that. But there are a lot of other ways to skin the cat.
Right. Right. So you all put your money in that you had saved up, right? And then you raised 150. You said 125, and like from friends and family. Yeah. And then they're in, like, but how? Like, if I were to give you money for that, and I'm not coming in as an LP. Like, how does that work?
You want a piece of the business. So we had two separate entities. One was going to be the entity that purchased the real estate. The way we structured it was that you would get a piece of that, and whatever future development took place on site, we would lease back the business because we were going to do a business on site.
Okay.
We were going to lease back that business to the real estate so that you would get a piece of the rent income from that piece of real estate. So that's how we structured it. I'm sure there's maybe better ways to do that, but just kind of.
But that was your first one.
That was the first one, and then again, I think it was appealing to our investors, and again, as long as they're okay with it, that's really what we're looking for. So.
Right. That's what a class act, right? You've opened your own brokerage.
Yeah, as of like 3 days ago, it finally got registered with CRE. So
oh my goodness,
we applied late last year, but it didn't hit until a few days ago.
Gotcha. And I know that in order to open up your own brokerage, you need a CCIM designation.
No, that's not true.
It's
nice to have. Good idea to have. It's nice to have for sure.
You need a broker's license.
Broker's license. I see.
So let's say you come to your census tomorrow and you say, "Hey, I do want to become a commercial real estate broker."
Sure.
You would go take the classes and get your license. You would have a sales associate's license.
Okay.
After doing that full time. Is it full-time for 2 years or like 20 hours a week at least or something like that?
Consider full-time, yeah.
After 2 years, you can then test for your broker's license. And when you have your broker's license, you can own or operate your own firm.
Right. And when you get your broker's license, is that typically for that reason, to open up your own?
Yeah, like if top producer Todd Humphreys came in here
tomorrow and told me he got his broker's license, I would think he's going to do his own thing.
Gotcha.
That would be my first thought.
But like he's because we had him on, he's so happy where he's at. Oh, yeah, right. And so he's not.
He didn't need it.
He doesn't need it. And like he's got no interest in CCIM either.
There's no real advantage to a broker's license
beyond opening your own brokerage, right?
He could also, like, let's say I don't want to be the broker anymore. Mm-hmm. Like I just wanted to own the brokerage and not participate at all. Mm-hmm. And I was going to go do something else. He could get his broker's license and be the principal broker for Barron Commercial Group. Yeah. Like, if not me, it would need to be somebody else.
Yeah.
So that could be a reason, but
sure.
Yep.
Well, there's a lot more liability when it comes to having your broker's license because you have to remain compliant with all the regulations and make sure that any agents under you are not doing anything that's nefarious.
Mm-hmm. So if you have an agent that does something on the stupid side, it could come back on you.
Mm-hmm. So at what point did you decide you wanted to open up your own brokerage?
I mean, I kind of always knew I wanted to, but I didn't know when. I mean, I felt like I had to kind of establish myself before I did it.
Sure.
So after year 4, I felt, I had a good amount of business coming in, and I felt like more comfortable with that thought process, and so I got my broker's license. I think it was in March of 24, just to get it. Just to have it. Didn't really have any intentions of leaving at that moment in time, but
at some point,
I mean, the goal was to eventually transition, but I just didn't. I just wanted to have it just to have it.
Dig the well before you're thirsty.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the thought process there, and it just so happened that probably around June, July, I started thinking, okay, well, if I was going to make a jump, it gives me 5 months, 6 months to kind of give me some lead time to kind of put all the pieces in place. Because it's not like you can start your own brokerage from today or tomorrow, but there's a lot of moving pieces that you want to set up before you jump, because you don't want to be scrambling by the time you have to. So
sure.
So I took those months to not only work on my own business, but then also have conversations with my eventual business partner to start creating the website, to figuring out what the businesses are going to be called, logos, all the things that you need to do to start a business. So.
And I just want to state for the record, because a lot of times when this happens and somebody gets their broker's license, they leave their firm, they start another one, that process can burn some bridges. Mm-hmm. And we don't really have to talk about it here, but we were talking about it before in the hallway, and I really appreciate, and I'm sure the Grisante group does too, the way you left. It seemed like you did it very well.
Yeah, I tried to. I mean, they
commend you for that.
They took a chance on me from the beginning, and I told them, I said, look, I wouldn't be where I'm at without you guys. So I just want you guys to understand that the amount of appreciation I have will be into perpetuity. There's no question about that. It's just the moment in time where I feel like I need to do my own thing. It has nothing to do with my dissatisfaction with the firm. It has everything to do with me wanting to do what my own thing.
Yeah.
So, and obviously Paul and Nick, them. They're just stand-up people.
Yeah, they're great.
They were just like, we kind of figured that this was going to happen, eventually. So
right. Now, we don't have too much time left, but I do want to hit and ask you about your podcast, right?
Sure, yeah.
So, how many do you have right now?
Oh, man, I'm not sure. A couple hundred. If you factor in the CRE 101 and then you factor in the other podcasts we had, altogether probably a couple hundred.
Couple hundred episodes? Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
But CRE
101, probably, I would say about 100 maybe, because that one I do every other week, and that one's topic driven. So it's not, obviously I interview people, but my purpose with that podcast is to say, okay, well, let's talk about senior housing. Yeah. So I'm going to bring in a senior housing expert and let's talk about that, or CCIM with Bo, right? We focus our conversation strictly on that one topic.
Right.
And so it takes a little bit more planning. It takes a little bit more thought into saying, okay, well, how are we going to answer or ask questions that are really going to try to extract as much as we can within this time frame that we have? And so, over time it's become, I'm still managing it. It's going great, but sometimes how running a podcast is. It takes a lot of effort. So I just I'm at the point now where I feel like I got to start bringing in people to kind of help out.
Right.
Because a lot of it I'm doing myself. I have a virtual assistant, but I'm still having to do a lot of stuff.
I know, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That really is a lot. Well, okay, can you take me back to the beginning of that, of why do it, and what was the thought process, and then how you got it lifted up, like the first few episodes and all that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I started in brokerage at the end of July of 2019. And so the first few months of the business, obviously you're not really gaining any traction. I was cold calling people, just randomly say, hey, you want to sell? And they're like, no. Okay. So it was, I don't know how many, 40, 50 calls a day or something like that, just to try to generate some interest. And I mean, that's what you have to do. You don't have any other ways to really generate those types of opportunities. And then when I started gaining a little bit of traction, started working with a few people, and then COVID hit, like March of 2020.
COVID.
And then I was, all my clients that I would have been working with are like, oh, we're not going to do anything because we can't leave our house.
Right.
And so I was at home for, I think most people were at home, it was like a couple of weeks. I can't even remember now. It's been.
Yeah, I think.
It was like 2 weeks or something, right? We couldn't even leave.
In Kentucky. Well, in Kentucky.
Oh,
I don't know. The next week I was coming into the office, but the office was closed. Yeah. But Dad and I would end up in the office.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
But we were. Yeah, everybody was working from home.
We were inside for months in Chicago. Anyway.
Yeah. So I don't remember the time frame, but essentially we were just sitting at home, and I was working from home, and no one was in the office at the time, and so I said, okay, well, I can't really solicit business because no one's doing anything, and they're not going to really be interested in working with me because they don't know what's going to happen next month or the month after that or whatever. So I figured, okay, well, everyone's at home, everyone's online because there's nothing to do. And
right.
So I just decided to start doing live streams.
Yeah.
On Facebook and whatever else. And so I started educating people about, what's a lease, for example, kind of going through that motion. And then I started talking about the process to purchase a property, and I started looping in bankers and whatever else. And then I started that whole topic-driven discussion, and over time it just grew. And I think I got kind of lucky in that Commercial Real Estate 101 is, it's the SEO of that is great. So
it's a great.
Yeah. So I was getting a lot of traction early on. I think partly because of the name. Yeah. And so now, we got, I think, last I checked, it was like 7,000 or 8,000 downloads a month, and we've got, 7,000 or 8,000 followers, and
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, so stuff like that.
Yeah, so it came out of COVID and needing something to do and put it out there. Did you live stream on LinkedIn as well?
At the time, no, but then I learned about StreamYard and things like that. So I started doing live streams on LinkedIn and everything else. So
it seems like, and like with a lot of people we have talked to that does do content like this, like
Chad,
not Chad, Justin.
Oh, Justin Ryder.
Yeah, Justin Ryder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they're in Lexington.
Lexington. Yeah, no, Justin.
Yeah, just like the amount of business that you can actually do and get on just a very, very high scale through LinkedIn.
Oh yeah,
right.
I generated a couple big deals off LinkedIn last year.
Yeah.
I just reached out to me. And one was like a 70,000 square foot industrial building. Yeah, we sold, or we're selling right now. It's under contract. But
right, and they probably wouldn't have reached out to you if you weren't posting the stuff that you're posting about.
Yeah. I think they found me on LinkedIn, so it's I would imagine that helps for sure with visibility.
Well, if you had no presence on LinkedIn, they wouldn't have found you.
Absolutely,
right.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Yeah.
All right, so you're doing that, and you're like, I guess what I was going to ask was, it came out of COVID, right? And you're still doing it, and you still have plans to keep it going.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think over time, we're with the new brokerage, we're talking about incorporating a new podcast called Develop Lou or Louisville. We're still figuring out the name of the podcast, but we'd like to start profiling development projects around town because I'm starting to get into development. I'd like to eventually continue on that path, and so it creates that notoriety pertaining to, these guys know about development because they are interviewing all the major players in town, and we plan to try to expand regionally, incorporating Indiana, Ohio, Tennessee.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful that podcast will help to kind of showcase that we know what we're doing as far as development long term. Obviously, I don't know nearly as much as the other person who's been in it for 20 years yet, but I'm starting to get into it. I've gotten a little bit of experience through just the deals that I'm actively working on. And
but it seems like that's part of what so far what you've been doing with podcasting is talking to people who are smarter than you in these certain areas to learn more.
Absolutely.
Right?
100%.
And I think, that's just it's so good. We hear all the time about, like, if you're going to put out podcasts or if you're going to choose something to make content about, make it be something that you are an expert in. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily is that always the case, right? Mm-hmm. You can become an expert by talking to experts And that's like to anybody. I talk to people reach out all the time about like, I want to do a podcast or this or whatever. And like, I think that's where the direction you went and what you've done. And not only is it establishing you as an authority, but you are actually becoming an authority as you're talking to more and more people. Same with us, as we're.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're either providing expertise or you're bringing somebody on to provide the expertise.
That's
but
right.
Regardless of which way or anything in between, when somebody tunes in to listen, they get some expertise.
Right.
And so there's value there. And it's...
Well, trust building too. I mean, I'm sure you've had people walk up to you at some of these conferences and they're just like, oh, I listened to the podcast,
Yeah.
So they feel like they already know you, and it saves a lot of, the initial awkwardness of interacting with people. I've met with owners plenty of times in Louisville. They were like, oh, I saw you on LinkedIn, or I saw you on Facebook, or I was looking, YouTube channel. I realized that you do that, and I've been following you for a while. And so it creates that.
They know
the barrier drops completely.
Oh, yeah.
that's right. Yeah, they already trust you
because they know who you are.
Yeah.
Let people know where they can find you.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. So it's you can just reach out to me via LinkedIn, all the social platforms. You can just follow me. My name is Rafael, Raphal. Last name Collazo, Collazo. My website's my name. The new firm that we started is called Summit Commercial Group. You can find us at sumcg.com. And that's it.
T.com.
Great.
And then Commercial Real Estate 101.
Yeah, Commercial Real Estate 101. You can just type it into Spotify and it'll be one of the first ones that pop up. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, this was awesome.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for
I'm
taking the time to drive down.
Oh no, I mean, I would never have done it live. I'm not with online. I feel like you got to be in person. So
yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I love the dynamic when it's
yeah,
in person for sure.
And I also love the dynamic of a live, which we're about to do. Subscribe to us on YouTube and on social media platforms. Hit subscribe, ding that little bell. Oh, whoa. I went in to say something else and I went into our spiel. Yeah. Follow. Oh my God.
On all the social media platforms, you can find us as Commercially Speaking, except for on X, which is ComSpeakPod. We'd love to engage with you there and invite you to join us on those platforms. Also, we do a weekly newsletter full of great content that we curate. It also will deliver to you our latest podcast episodes, so you never have to go searching for any of those. You can subscribe to that at subscribe.wgbarron.com. We'd love to have you join us there as well. And
if you want a virtual executive assistant, you can go to Superpowers HQ, superpowershq.com/commercially speaking. Let them know that you came from us. If you are following us on YouTube and X, you will know that we go live. And we're starting to do that more. And we're going live right now with Michael Hieronymus. That's why we're rushing out here real quick.
That's right.
But yeah, if you subscribe, you would know that. You would know that. I love you, brother.
Love you too, man.
Bye, Alice.
Bye.
We'll see y'all next Monday.
Say bye to Alice.
Bye, Alice.